So, as you've most likely seen by now, Renji and Rukia have received quite the upgrade thanks to their time in the Royal Palace. And you know what? It's well deserved. They've both been major characters since the earliest days of the series, and it's great to see them actually keeping pace with the exponentially increasing power levels of the story. All accusations of Renji being a failure are swept away in a shower of fire and fangs as he utterly obliterates Masked Masculine, while Rukia comes one step closer to completing her character's journey by finally learning bankai and annihilating her brother's tormentor in a torrent of crystalline cold. So like I said, both well-deserved power-ups, and draped in their royal realm garb, the two of them arrive on the battlefield as much-needed reinforcements, capable now of going toe-to-toe with captain level and even slightly beyond enemies, and fighting shoulder to shoulder with their superiors. The question is, though, just how powerful have the two of them become now? How drastically has their strength increased since last we saw them, and which of the two of them is stronger? Who came away from their training with the Zero Division with the biggest bounty? This might be a bit of a messy video, but I'm hoping it'll be a fun one too, so let's take a look. Before we get started on the video, guys, if you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure to do that now for more Bleach content like this every single week. And if you enjoyed the video, when you're done with it, give it a thumbs up as well to help support me and the channel. And if you want to take that support for me another step further, I do also have a Patreon as well. And as always, I need to say an enormous thank you and give a massive shout out to every single person supporting me over on Patreon. I really do appreciate each and every one of you. And of course, there will be spoilers for the 1000-year Blood War arc of Bleach in the video to come. Before we actually begin, what's the deal with the Royal Palace training anyway? If Soul Society was in such trouble against the Vandenreich, you'd think the Zero Division would have been given permission by the Soul King to take a few more captains up as well to help give them that boost, considering how considerable that boost actually is. Now, I appreciate there is quite a lot involved here. It would have taken a fair bit more time to send even a couple of additional characters through all 5 of those different trials and tribulations, but honestly, on the whole, I think it probably would have been worth it for the Soul Society's war effort. Imagine if they elected to take, say, Zaraki and Kyoraku back with them as well. Do those two captains have scope to improve even further with the addition of divine training, or would it yield very little from them? And I appreciate Kyoraku logistically might be difficult with him being the head captain and all, but still. And so building on that idea of how much of an increase would that training have given to characters like Zaraki and Kyoraku, does every character have the potential to be improved as much as Renji and Rukia were? Does the training help them to reach their power ceiling, or does it surpass their original ceiling and create a brand new one, or perhaps it shatters the conception of a power ceiling in the first place? For me, the training feels like it has different outcomes depending on the character involved, but maybe that's because they all start in varying places. For example, Renji feels like he goes way beyond his original capacity, but Rukia simply comes closer to reaching hers. But again, maybe that's because she was further behind him initially. Now, when it comes to these two characters, Kubo's intent with the imagery here is clear to me. Although they're not captains, not yet anyway, the robes they're now wearing definitely seem to be designed to evoke that sense. Shots of Renji and Rukia garbed now in billowing white cloaks are definitely supposed to be evocative of captains' Haoris. They're meant to make you think of captains when you look at them, and that's only reinforced by their newfound powers and presence on the battlefield. So let's begin with Renji, as his power-up feels the most dramatic and is also ultimately the most confusing. The thing with Renji is that I think people tend to forget or overlook is that he was always strong. Ever since the days of the Soul Society arc, he's always been one of the strongest vice-captains, with a dream of surpassing Byakuya, who himself was one of the strongest captains in that arc, and the ambition and drive to try and make it a reality. Yes, his Zanpakuto was clunky, cumbersome, limited in scope and versatility, and his bankai was the same if not worse in many ways. But that fit his character at the time too. Renji was a rugged, shaggy dog of a brute with a heart of gold, his Zabimaru representing the fangs he wielded in a desperate attempt to close the gap between himself and his captain. Where we find Renji now in the 1000-year Blood War arc, having finished his training in the Royal Palace, Palace and we see his true bankai Sou Zabimaru and how different it looks to Hihio Zabimaru. It's now much smaller, much more compact, more nimble. We see that as a reflection of Renji's greater focus, his greater confidence, his greater understanding of his own power. Of course, though, Renji gained a reputation for being a loser, to put it brutally, much like the Vizards that he would later save in the 1000-Year Blood War arc. Despite his power and ferocity, which I always felt came across well in the Soul Society arc, Renji struggled immensely in the Arrancar arc, which unfortunately for him was a long, winding story which lasted for enough time for certain characters to leave a near permanent impression on the audience based on their performance throughout the entire arc. Renji's bankai, in particular Hihio Zabimaru, would join the ranks of Daiguren Hyorinmaru and Kokujo Tengen Myo, to name a few, as one that was wielded all too often and with too little to show for it. Across the Arrancar arc, Renji struggled immensely against a Fraction, though admittedly he was under Gentei Kaijo at the time, barely survived getting Xyloporo to Resurrection, and then didn't stand a chance after that and was defeated off-screen by Yami. His fortunes seemed to be changing after the time skip. Now, while Jackie wasn't a powerful opponent by any stretch of the imagination, Renji's defiant statement about having trained to defeat Aizen seemed to signal a change in the way Kubo wanted to portray him, perhaps finally allowing him to shed the stigma he'd earned over the course of the Arrancar arc and evolve into a true leader. And so we find ourselves here. The Gotei 13 is embroiled in the most brutal war it will ever face, and Renji has just returned from the Royal Palace, rocketing down from the skies like a shooting star to resolve a grudge match left over from the first Quincy invasion. What makes Renji's current power situation such a topic of debate is the fight that he finds himself involved in, but as with most things in Bleach, I'm not sure it's as black and white as it might first appear, and between the source material and the new anime, it seems like they're trying to say different things about where Renji is right now. Mask Demasculine, a sternritter whose power is the superstar, grows stronger and is revitalized every time his #1 fan James cheers for him. But the actual ability of these cheers is nebulous. They seem to be able to do everything and anything depending on what Mask actually needs, from increasing his physical power and endurance to actually healing serious wounds. Now, I've always been a staunch defender of Bleach's power levels overall, as I think they do actually make a lot of sense if you take the time to look at them in detail, which is maybe something we'll do in a separate video. However, I did find myself utterly baffled by this fight when it first came out, and I discussed this in a video I made almost 3 years ago, specifically addressing the battle between Renji and Mask Demasculine, how it seemed to take Bleach's mostly well thought out power levels and throw them to the wind. Let's take a look at Mask's overall progression in the fight first to gain some context. He appears and defeats Hisagi, Ikkaku and Yumachika with relative ease, though we know from the anime and from Hisagi's later remarks to Kensei in the original chapter that Mask needed at least one cheer from James to revive himself and continue the fight. At this stage, Mask has overpowered 3 vice-captain level fighters, and in fact it's probably arguable that Ikkaku and Hisagi are low-tier captain level right now. But of course, at the end of the day, calling someone captain level is a somewhat meaningless term, as captains can run the gamut from, say, Komamura and Soifon to Yamamoto. But regardless, the point stands, and it still mostly makes sense. After all, the sternritter as well shouldn't be underestimated. Every single one of them has been recorded to have captain level Reiatsu or above, and that's without considering their individual abilities and powers. This means that no matter where on the captain level spectrum they sit, every single member of the sternritter is at least as strong as the weakest member of Soul Society's 13 strongest officers. Mask then battles Kensei and is very quickly overpowered and defeated, but a cheer from James gets the superstar back onto his feet. He then sends both Kensei and Rose flying, but it's important to note that neither captain was expecting Mask to return, and both are very clearly caught off guard here. After this, Kensei returns to the fight, and this is when things seem to be the most even, in my opinion. Although Mask proceeds to smack Kensei around a bit, it's not enough to faze the captain, and he's able to retaliate, forcing Mask back into a corner. The original chapter makes it a little clearer that after transforming his knuckles to do whatever that does, Kensei is back on the front foot. As Mask cries out, he wails as he tries to defend himself. However, another cheer from James allows Mask to overcome Kensei's attacks and then swiftly take him down. In my original video, I argued that James's cheers must stack on top of each other or else it doesn't seem to make sense. Mask must be getting more powerful each time he is cheered for. But do the effects of James's cheers stay like this forever, or is there a cooling off period where after a certain amount of time, Mask will slowly slide back to his base form? Or, better yet, does the essence of James's cheers completely reset when he is killed? Ultimately, we don't know. These are all just theories at the end of the day. If it's the latter option, I honestly think that makes the most sense. Having trounced Kensei, Mask is now stronger than ever, but his power is reset when Rose slaughters James. Mask defeating Rose in the manner that he does isn't really indicative of anyone's strength, in my opinion. If Mask already had Captain level Reiatsu before any power-ups, then his Star Flash ability would have no problem punching a hole through Rose, no matter how many times James had cheered for him. Rose simply gets very unlucky here, and had Mask not worked out how to nullify Rose's bankai, there's no telling where the fight would have ended up. Maybe Rose would have won with ease, maybe the bankai would have been dispelled had Mask activated his holy form. Either way, we'll never truly know. However, at this stage, Renji arrives and saves Rose, preparing to take on Mask Demasculine himself. At this point, as we all know, Mask has defeated two captains, both of whom were using bankai, but I don't necessarily think that's completely indicative of Mask being hugely stronger than two captains in bankai, when you look at the circumstances surrounding their defeats. One point of interest is Rukia telling Renji that Mask is no match for what you've become, indicating they're well aware that they have had substantial power-ups, though Rukia saying that to Renji makes it sound like he's become a divine being or something, when later skirmishes and battles wouldn't necessarily reinforce that idea. Also, we have to revisit the question of what level is Mask's power currently at the time of Renji's arrival. It's either still extremely high after Mask defeated Kensei, or it has been reset after Rose killed James. Again, we have no reason to believe that Mask's power is reset by James dying, it's just one of a number of theories. Either way, James returns and cheers for Mask once more, restoring his eardrums. It's also interesting to note, as an aside, the burns Mask receives from Rose's bankai are not healed by James's cheers, so perhaps that proves that it's not a catch-all ability. And here's another conundrum to consider. Do James's cheers always strengthen Mask no matter what, or is there a limit to what he can do? Can it do two things at once? For example, can it regenerate Mask's eardrums and still increase his power at the same time, or is it a one or the other type deal? If not, and if Mask's power has somehow reverted slightly since before Renji arrived, then Mask may still be fairly weak if his power is on the way to returning to base, which may explain how Renji was able to decimate him so easily in Shikai. Also, this is where the anime comes in to shake up the portrayal of Renji. In the source material, Renji completely toys with Mask for a while in Shikai, cratering him into the earth with the butt of his Zanpakuto toe, catching his massive murder punch with ease, and nearly bifurcating him with a single swing of his blade. This made Renji look incredibly powerful, to the point where he was simply messing around with a captain-level foe. Also, Renji kills James again. The anime changes this, as if concerned that Renji looked too strong in the original depiction, removing all of these scenes in favour of just having Renji kill James instantly and then slashing Mask once. Bear in mind as well that so far Mask hasn't really fought anyone with a traditional blade combined with Renji's improved stats, and it makes sense that he'd be able to move fast enough to slash Mask once without the sternritter realising it, but it's obviously not enough to kill him. The anime definitely goes out of its way to make Mask look more competent on the whole, while not diminishing Renji's prowess. Mask then proceeds to batter Renji once he's powered up again, even activating his Vollständig and forcing Renji to use bankai. There's of course the question of whether or not Renji needed to use bankai to win, but both the original chapter and the anime make it pretty clear that Renji is being totally overpowered and thrown around like a ragdoll, and again I'd warn against underestimating the sternritter. A common through line in this arc that the Shinigami all believe is that the average sternritter can't be defeated without bankai at all. However, once Renji activates his true bankai, Sou Zabimaru, he completely dominates Mask to the point where the sternritter doesn't get a single attack in. While it's clear that Renji now totally outclasses Mask, there's a couple of things to consider here too. Mask is absolutely blinded by rage at this point and obviously isn't thinking clearly, while Renji is in the perfect frame of mind and focused on killing his enemy. Now, I'm not saying that Mask would win were he calm, because I don't think he would, but it might have prevented him from running in and being immediately destroyed. Another issue I have with Renji and his portrayal is that we never see him do anything like this again, and so his true power is revealed to us and contained within a vacuum. Later on, he battles Bazz-B very briefly using Sou Zabimaru, but the two barely exchange blows. If Renji had managed to stab Bazz-B like he did with Mask, would he have been able to kill him outright with Zaga Teppo again? How much stronger is Bazz-B when compared to Mask, if at all? Man, I really need to revisit my sternritter ranking videos from a few years back. I think that would be another fun video, another trip down memory lane. And then there's the narrative aspect of the fight. It's obvious that Kubo wanted to roll out the red carpet for Renji as one of the main cast members, and that does mean sacrifices had to be made to make him look even better. That's why it feels premature to call Rose and Kensei weak when it's so clear they were sent out to die by Kubo for the sake of a bombastic entrance for Renji. It's also possible that the reason this fight gets as crazy as it does is to try and mimic the spectacle and glamour of a wrestling match, so maybe the logic of the Bleach universe was being tucked aside momentarily just to allow for a crazy smackdown. Either way, it's clear that Renji has received a substantial power-up no matter which way you look at it, even if I do think there are numerous variables that need to be considered here as well when looking at this fight on the whole. But what's important though is that Kubo was able to depict Renji as getting a decisive victory over a powerful opponent, one who had just defeated two captains, which is obviously a great and well-deserved win for this character. So if we bring up my recent end-of-series captains ranking list from a video I did a few months ago now, and we look at this and we consider the Vizards to be roughly average, mid-tier captains based on what we've seen, then I think you can find Masked Masculine floating around this point too, maybe around 8th or something like that when in comparison with the captains. And that makes sense to me. Mask is able to power up to be slightly stronger than them as we see, but honestly I think he mostly looks extremely powerful due to things absolutely going his way more than once and then having a subsequent string of wins under his belt. In Shikai then, post-Royal Palace Renji, I would say, comes in probably around upper mid-tier captain level, and activating his true bankai pushes him even further beyond that, allowing him to kill Master Masculine with ease. And so if we take a look at the list here that I made up for that other video, I think for now I would place Renji here at 6th between Hitsugaya and Shinji. Shinji is such a wild card at the end of the day and very difficult to rank, and to be honest, Renji might even be able to defeat Hitsugaya when using Sou Zabimaru, so long as Hitsugaya doesn't last long enough to activate his mature bankai. Either way, I think this makes sense and definitely denotes an absolutely massive jump in power and ability for Renji, but you might think I'm off base with that. Honestly, like I said, that sequence is messy to talk about, but it is fun too, as I like discussing all the different variables and possibilities. On the other hand, Rukia is a lot simpler, I think, as her growth follows the trajectory she's been on in the story until this point. Rukia is the officer through which we get to see the journey through the ranks. She starts out the story as an unseated officer, albeit one being held back by Byakuya, and eventually is promoted to vice captain after her efforts in the Rancor arc, before being made a captain at the end of the 1000-Year Blood War. Rukia has always been a step ahead of the curve, however, and it always made her progress feel very natural to me. For example, she manages to kill an Espada all on her own in the Waco Mundo arc. But to counter that, not only was Aranjero technically the weakest Espada of them all, but doing so nearly got Rukia killed as well. But despite that, her victory there meant that she was the most impressive of the supporting cast for sure, and that she had already earned her vice captain stripes, and frankly then some. Of course, Rukia has, like I said, long been stronger than her unseated position would lead you to believe. She was merely being kept back by Byakuya in an effort to protect her, meaning she had been vice captain material for some time, as was also displayed when she killed D-Roy almost instantly. Having become a vice captain during the time skip, Rukia has also gained a lot of confidence in herself and her abilities, yet the power-up she receives from her training with the Zero Division is arguably a lot more mysterious than Renji's. With Renji, we explicitly see his meeting with Ichibei where he learns Hihio Zabimaru is not his Bankai's real name. It's therefore obvious where the bulk of his newfound power comes from. Yet, despite now knowing its true power, Rukia's Zanpakuto is still called Sodei no Shirayuki. Did Ichibei help her to draw out its true strength? And has she been weaker than she should have been this entire time? In doing so, in helping her draw out the true ability of Sodei no Shirayuki, did that help Rukia learn Bankai? Presumably she unlocked Bankai in the Royal Palace, but it's always possible she learned it before that. However, considering the ability of her Bankai, I think it's safe to assume that unlocking it went hand in hand with knowing the true ability of her Shikai too, since they're of course directly related. Then there's her showcase in the 1,000-Year Blood War after she returns to the battlefield. While impressive, she's never shown to be as domineering as Renji, and her battle with Asnod is on far more equal footing than Renji's fight with Mask de Masculine. Again though, these things are very hard to quantify and the two are not directly comparable. Asnod is a totally different fighter to Mask, relying almost exclusively on his extremely broken ability to terrify opponents into submission, and it succeeded on Rukia too, Zero Division training be damned. But this is the same power that also broke Byakuya, and I think would certainly have affected Renji as well. Again, although Asnod may not be a physical fighter at all, his Reryoku is still at the level of a captain's and he shouldn't be underestimated. In Rukia's case, unlike Renji, where it is a little more up for debate, I think there's no question she needed to use Bankai in order to win. The fact it killed Asnod in one blast seems more indicative of the Bankai's special ability than of Asnod's own endurance. But considering she now knows Bankai, and she definitively killed a member of the Sternritter during the war, which many captains couldn't muster, Rukia has proudly come full circle, and there's no debating her final position as a captain at the end of the series. So that is a messy video, I know. I always find in particular the conversation surrounding Renji's post-Royal Palace self to be troublesome, but what's clear is that he's considerably more powerful than before, and is now comfortably, I would say, upper mid-tier captain level, while slightly higher in Bankai, while Rukia herself is probably mid-tier captain through and through. Both of them received substantial help from the Zero Division, and while I think it's clear that Renji is the stronger of the two of them, as he has been really since day one, their trajectories are both very positive. I wonder which aspect of the training in the Royal Palace gives you the biggest boost. Hikifune swapping out your Reiatsu seems to be a big deal to me. Did Rukia have to face the Asauchi like Renji and Ichigo did? And meanwhile, we don't really know the ins and outs of Ichibei's training, but it's safe to assume that probably had an enormous impact on how they utilised their Zanpakuto in battle. It's always interesting to have discussions like these, as like I said at the start of the video, I find the answers to really be so straightforward, and I always love to get your input on these as well in the comments. Renji to me is definitely stronger than Rose and Kensei, but perhaps not by as much as the fight would lead you to believe. After all, like I said, I still think there's a chance Rose could have taken the win had circumstances played out differently. And so again, to reiterate, if we go back to my end of series ranking one last time, then I think it does actually all make sense to some degree. And having Renji at 6th, as proposed earlier, I think works. That would indicate a substantial difference in power, but also it wouldn't mean that Renji is completely breaking the bank in terms of where he's actually at now. But of course, I mean, lists make everything look so easy. When it comes to Bleach, oftentimes the victor of a fight is dependent on everyone's own unique abilities and not just how strong they actually are. But I feel like I'm going to start going round in circles in a minute, so I'll leave it there. How much stronger did Renji and Rukia become thanks to their training in the Royal Palace? The answer is considerably, though it differs between them. Renji was already a lot stronger than he often got credit for, and now slots in close to the upper level of captains by the end of the series, even if he's not quite there yet. Meanwhile, Rukia is closer to the middle of the pack, but still skews slightly upwards with plenty of room for improvement. But that's it for the video. I really hope you enjoyed it. I hope it wasn't too all over the place. And like I said, please do let me know your thoughts and theories down in the comments below. Am I completely off base? Would you rank Renji and Rukia in roughly the same places as I did in my end of series captains plus Renji ranking? I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. How do you feel about the battle between Kensei, Mask, Rose, Renji, all those characters coming together and how it played out? Could Rose have defeated Mask? It does seem like Kensei was definitively beaten by Mask, but that's perhaps because Mask excels in physical, in-your-face confrontation, just like Kensei does. And if Mask is stronger than Kensei outright, then Kensei is always going to lose that. But Rose's more magical powers, slightly more ethereal, slightly more abstract abilities meant that he maybe had the upper hand on Mask until he no longer did. But there I go, I'm talking about it again when I said I was going to stop. There's a lot to discuss here, and I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. But guys, I really hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure to leave a like if you did. Comment below your thoughts on everything here. I'd love to hear them. And make sure to hit subscribe if you haven't done already. And until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.